History shows a disturbing pattern. A new communication technology appears. Propaganda adapts, society struggles to keep up, and chaos ensues. But today, we've created something even more powerful. The most effective propaganda machine ever built has been unleashed, and it's already rewriting reality. But is this cause for despair or for optimism? And what can we learn from history as we live through the biggest revolution of them all? Hey people, welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Michael. I have a degree in ancient history, and on this channel, we explore the recurring patterns that shape and shatter civilizations. Let's get into it. Ideas matter. We like to talk about powerful kings of history commanding great armies on battlefields, but at the end of the day, a ruler is just one person. And to be an effective ruler, they need to convince thousands of people to follow them in the first place. Power stems from belief, and nothing inspires belief more than good propaganda. Rulers have been using propaganda as a tool to legitimize their regimes since the dawn of time. Yet, the more centuries pass, the more powerful this tool has become, in the right or the wrong hands. But it's reached a point now where we have to wonder, is propaganda totally out of control? The art of propaganda came to being at pretty much the moment we first invented writing, maybe even before that. Humans have always found ways to create narratives that paint our side as being good, justified, and/or effective, while the other side is painted as wrong, evil, and/or ineffective. We see large-scale propaganda campaigns as far back as the days of the civil wars of the late Roman Republic. While facing off against Mark Antony and Cleopatra, the young Octavian, who would later become Rome's first emperor, spread rumors that Mark Antony was being puppeteered by the Egyptian foreign seductress Cleopatra. He used this tale as justification to declare war on the two and to cement his rule. Now, propaganda isn't inherently a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with using storytelling to advocate why the world should be a certain way. The danger of propaganda comes from who's using it, why, and how. Writing has been, by far and away, the best way of spreading propaganda throughout the vast majority of human history. Sure, back alley whispers, dramatic speeches, and town criers played a part, but you can spread a message so much farther and in so many places at once with a piece of paper and some ink. The drawback to writing, however, was obvious. First, early literacy rates weren't high, so not a whole bunch of people could actually read your message. Second, a man, a quill, and a whole lot of ink was the only way to write out propaganda. Every single copy of a pamphlet or book you wanted to make had to be written by hand. That includes the 1,000+ page Bible, which had to be written down by monks. But then, along comes the printing press in the 15th century, and everything changed. It's hard to overstate just how much the printing press altered the course of human history. The rate at which works of literature could be produced absolutely skyrocketed. A book that would once take months to copy could now be done in a couple of days. The printing press thus suddenly made books and other works of writing much more accessible to the average, run-of-the-mill person. Literacy rates shot up. The stranglehold elites and the clergy had over education began to crumble. Nobody at the time predicted this would happen, the church least of all. So new technology had changed the way that information spread, and the rest of the world had to scramble over itself to adapt. But the real impact of the printing press came into play more than half a century after its invention. At the beginning of the 16th century, the Catholic Church's religious authority over Europe came under attack. These were the first days of what's called the Reformation. Protestants, including Lutherans, strongly criticised the Catholic practice of selling indulgences, which many people saw as effectively paying for forgiveness, and argued that religious authority should come from scripture rather than the Pope. But the printing press was vital to this movement, both helping create and accentuate the Reformation. Higher literacy rates and the spread of Bibles in languages other than Latin meant more people had access to scripture than ever before, which made people question the church, who they'd previously been relying on for spiritual guidance. But more importantly, the reformists jumped on the propaganda opportunity the printing press presented. They saw how easily they could mass-produce pamphlets and articles to spread around Europe. Thus, just like that, the reformists had access to a full-scale propaganda machine that could spread reformist ideas all across the continent. Even Martin Luther's initial 95 Theses, the spark that ignited the Protestant fire, were distributed thanks to the printing press. The church was caught completely off guard. Pamphlets, theses, texts, articles, and even political cartoons spread like wildfire. The church was depicted as corrupt and greedy, and those arguments stuck. The reformists dealt a massive first blow in the propaganda war by using a revolutionary new piece of technology, and it took a long time for the church to pick itself up and strike back. But this pattern of a new piece of technology rapidly changing the propaganda landscape, faster than anyone can actually keep up with, repeats throughout history. And far too often, the end result is bloody. The printing press was perhaps the first major evolutionary jump for how states and groups spread propaganda, but it was far from the last one. Nor was it the most impactful. The centuries that followed saw the same pattern repeat. A brand new technology comes along, groups use it to spread a message, the status quo is rocked, and society scrambles to right itself. We have to fast forward now a little from the 16th century to the beginning of the 20th. The technological jump from the 1500s to the 1900s is staggering. The invention of the steam engine and complex machinery changed how people lived. Living standards rise dramatically, and the world entered a new age. But it wasn't any of the machines in the factories that affected the average person the most. No, it was something far more discreet, but ever so powerful. The radio might not have been readily available in everyone's homes in the 1920s, but the lucky few households that did have one found the new device fascinating. One man's voice can now be heard all throughout the country, even beyond. The radio had a huge edge over pamphlets and the written word, because you didn't need to be literate to get the message. But still, most people in the early 1920s couldn't afford a radio. The first domino in the propaganda chain had been nudged, but it had still yet to fall. But, over the years, technology evolved. Radios not only became more powerful and reliable, they became much cheaper to produce. So it wasn't long before nearly every household in Western Europe and the United States had a little radio. Families would gather round to listen to the news, and friends would set up a radio on their lunch breaks to listen to live football. Once again, the fabric of society and day-to-day life was changing. Thus, by the mid-1930s, society was more interconnected than ever, all thanks to this invention. So, if a political group wanted to spread an important message, what better option than the little box that hooked your voice up to pretty much every household in the country? Well, just like in the 1500s, some groups caught on to this new reality far quicker than others. Unfortunately for the world, the worst possible people saw the propaganda potential the radio offered almost immediately. The Nazi Party in Germany clocked that the radio could do a whole lot more than just let someone read off a written script. Sound allowed for a whole new layer of storytelling, passion in the voice, music, cadence, to make people feel all kinds of emotions. Joseph Goebbels, the head of the Nazi propaganda machine, knew that nothing drew people to a cause more than their feelings. And it's obvious to see even at the time. In 1936, a radio broadcast play of Wells's War of the Worlds was so convincing and powerful that people in the States genuinely thought it was real. The resulting panic forced the broadcasters to remind the people live on air that it was just a play. The world wasn't actually under attack by Martians. But the War of the Worlds incident proved just how effective radio messaging could be. And meanwhile, the Nazis were massively investing in radio technology, making sure everyone had access to one, and using it as a weapon to hammer home notions of racial superiority, myths of how the Jews were to blame for Germany's defeat in the Great War, and how only the National Socialists could save their country. So just as the church had no defense against the effects of the printing press, the German people had no defense against the insanely powerful propaganda campaign transmitted over the radio. The Nazis used the technology to whip the country into a frenzy, and that frenzy led to the deaths of over 60 million people. So the question on everyone's minds now should of course be, well, what about today? What's the big piece of technology that's radically changing how we see propaganda? Well, television took over from radio as the centerpiece of broadcasting. This carried on late into the 20th century and into the 21st, with cable news becoming the hot trend every political aspirant wanted to hop onto. In the 1990s, any politician worth their salt was itching to get a spot on the likes of Fox News or CBS to get their message out. But cable news didn't just speed up politics, it quietly changed how authority itself worked. With the arrival of the 24-hour news cycles, something new emerged: authority laundering. Information could be repeated across networks so rapidly that it began to feel independently verified, even when it all traced back to the same original claim. One expert would cite another expert, one network would quote another network, and before long, repetition itself became a substitute for evidence. The effect was powerful. When every channel appears to agree, disagreement starts to look irresponsible. Emotional pressure replaces argument, and neutrality becomes performance rather than a process. The lead up to the Iraq War showed this dynamic clearly. Government claims about weapons of mass destruction were repeated across major outlets. Experts cited each other's reporting, and dissenting voices were often framed as naive or unpatriotic. In the UK, the infamous September dossier, later dubbed the Dodgy Dossier, helped reinforce a narrative that much of the media echoed with little scrutiny. And we have seen this in more recent years as well, with information about COVID-19 being promoted by major TV outlets as fact, which later turned out to be false. Thus, once a consensus forms inside a 24-hour media system, it can be incredibly difficult to challenge, even when the underlying claims turn out to be wrong. But while TV definitely added a new visual layer, I don't think the jump from radio to TV is as big as some people claim, because at the end of the day, information and propaganda was still pretty much centralized. People tuned into the same shows. You didn't have a truly unlimited number of sources of information to choose from, and you could only tune in when you actually had a TV in front of you. So the real propaganda jump wasn't this, but it has happened, and you're probably using it right now. It's not exactly revolutionary to say, but social media has completely upended society. We use it for everything: business, pleasure, and of course, news. With nearly everyone using a smartphone, it's never been easier to get your message in front of someone's eyes. Because the internet has been such a wild west, we have millions, if not billions, of sources, all fighting tooth and nail for your attention at all times. And nobody is fighting harder than those with political goals. Memes, stories, breaking news are all tools states and parties wield to get their propaganda in front of you. The moment you open Instagram or X, you're bound to find an account that pushes a story, be it true or not, that resonates with you. The algorithm is designed that way. It might make you angry, sad, or happy, but the important thing is that it makes you feel something. Again, propaganda revolves around storytelling, and storytelling is all about tapping into the consumer's emotions. And this is to say nothing of the power of AI, which is getting so prevalent now that people are having a hard time separating reality from fiction. So, long story short, propagandists today have access to your attention at a level that propagandists of the past could only dream of, more even. The difference is that your average Joe on the street can also become a master propagandist, all with a few clicks. Thus, as it always does whenever a new piece of technology changes the information landscape, society is scrambling. We've had virtually no control over the spread of social media since it first launched at the start of the 21st century. We live in a society much more polarized and extreme than ever before, as people have 24/7 constant access to unchecked propaganda outlets. We don't see the other side as nuanced people, but rather black and white demons with no redeeming qualities. The same way the Nazis crafted these simple myths about outside groups, we're now making those myths about each other and dividing ourselves up. Most of these propaganda outlets are naturally occurring, but we all know states have also built entire bot farms to push certain pieces of content over others. We're still trying to figure out how to use social media in a responsible way. Should under 16s be banned? Should you have to verify yourself before posting online? Should we just bin it outright? The internet is flooded with millions of articles and videos debating the topic. But at the end of the day, the point is, we're definitely living in a time of significant social upheaval. But there is a potential bright side. We might not be going down the 1930s route this time around. Social media is inherently heavily decentralized. Anyone and everyone can post whatever they want, whenever they want. This decentralization has made it erratic and hard to control, but but it also means there's no single source with a vice grip hold on it. The reformists had a monopoly on the printing press in the 16th century. The Nazis had complete state control over radio broadcasts and all propaganda. But today, nobody has quite figured out how to tie down social media. Its inherently chaotic nature means there'll probably always be some kind of opposing viewpoint to be found, no matter how hard states try to clamp down on them. So we might live in a world where propaganda is much more effective, but also one where it's so hard to control that the good and the bad end up cancelling each other out. At least that's what we can hope for, and that's what I hope for. Because no matter how much we try to deny it, propaganda affects all of us. So it's up to all of us to see if we can adapt to the new landscape, or if it will push us to the same levels of destruction that we saw at the end of the 1930s. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, a comment, or subscribing to my channel down below. I'll see you next time.